It's now my pleasure to kick off our panel discussion for today, Insights from the Implementors. The speakers on our panel are Margie Graves, Deputy Chief Information Officer of the Department of Homeland Security, Richard McKinney, Chief Information Officer, Department of Transportation, and Dr. Paul Tibbetts, Chief Deputy Information Officer for Architecture, Strategy, and Design at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Our moderator for today's panel is our own Jack Moore, Nextgov's news editor. So Jack, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Connie. Thanks everyone for being here to talk FITARA. I think this is a topic of importance for everyone here. So a lot of people may not know about it, but I know this is an audience of experts, which can be a double-edged sword. So please, check my facts and correct me if it needs doing. We have a panel of CIOs and deputy CIOs who are the people who are implementing this legislation in the OMB guidance. We're about a year in since Congress approved the legislation and the president signed it, which may be too soon to really evaluate some of the factors, but we're going to do it anyway. FITARA gives agency CIOs a seat at the table, as they say. Formulating the budget, executing the budget, requires the CIO to sign off on IT procurements and have a say in the appointment of bureau and component level CIOs. So, how is it working out? Margie, could you start, tell us how the DHS CIO shop has seized these new authorities? Are you doing anything different, this point a year in that you weren't doing a year ago?
I would say that our biggest change has primarily been in the budgeting and financial analysis arena. So we have gotten full license to engage with our CFO community to bring the IT priorities to the fore, to have a say in both terms of architecture and also strategy as to how IT dollars are spent. We have been working very closely under the direction of our USM to make sure that our voice is early in the equation, and the earlier the better. So that our programs have the knowledge and expertise of the IT SMEs added at the very beginning before they even launch. I do believe that the CIO at DHS, as well as the deputy and others, have particular implementation authorities within what we call our ESCs. For most of our major programs, we have what we call executive steering committees. I'm sure many of you may call them other things, but they exist in other organizations also, where that really is where senior leadership comes to the table and talks through with the programs what they're going to do in terms of solutioning and how they're going to execute, and follows that program throughout its entire life cycle. Having the CIO voice early in that equation has been very helpful. I also wanted to illustrate it through what you might call response to the cyber sprint. So we all responded to the cyber sprint just recently, starting in June and finishing up very quickly, and then subsequently we've issued some other orders in addition to that since then. But what it allowed us to do is it allowed us to include the CFO community in our development of our priorities as to how to fill our gaps in terms of cyber. So whenever anything came out of the orders and there were people that raised their hands in our operating components and said, we have a gap here, we have a resourcing issue, we came to the table with the CFOs and racked and stacked the priorities even within the current budget year, including reprogrammings, and we made the adjustments necessary to actually execute. So I think that's a huge sea change in being able to do that.
Richard, I know I've heard you speak recently, and you mentioned that you met with your acquisition staff at DOT, and you said you were putting a freeze on new contracting. You said there was IT purchasing going on that even bureau level CIOs didn't know about. So there was a kind of a marked lack of transparency in what was being spent, and you put a stop to it temporarily. It's already been talked about this morning. Could you, explain your reasoning and what were the conversations that came out of that? And has there been anything else that you've invoked FITARA to do that you couldn't do before?
Well, I've been concerned since I came to DOT long before FITARA became law, concerned about the decentralized nature of the way we procure technology. DOT, if you look at it holistically, is the child of many hands, and I've been, from the day I came in the door, I've been trying to figure out how to get my arms around that and how I could control that. And obviously FITARA, I thought, gave me an opening. And so I did issue, or about to issue, have socialized a memo, talked about it with the CIO community and the CAO community. I just said, let's just pause for a minute on IT purchases, and I'm doing a sort of a baseline assessment. One of the things I lack as the DOT CO is I don't have what I've been referring to as an as-is blueprint. I kind of wanted to know, what do we have? Where is it? How is it secured? Who's attending to it? What personnel do we have? And I thought it wise to just not make that more difficult by continuing to buy stuff and continuing to make purchases. And as you mentioned, I sat down with the acquisition community, and they said, Richard, there's IT purchasing going on in the operating administrations that even the CIOs in those operating administrations are not aware of. And I thought, wow, that doesn't sound right. So I figured if I put a freeze on it, what I told the modal CIOs was, because the first thing was, what if something really has to happen? I said, well, then you should know about it, and you should be able to come to me. You should be able to say, here's this thing that really, I need your approval because this was really important, and you should be able to articulate why, and then we can see if it fits with our, moving to an enterprise shared services model, if this is something that we would want to do as an enterprise. And it's gotten a lot of press. I was kind of surprised by it. I was like, I thought it didn't seem to me like people say that's a really bold move, and I'm thinking, no, it's not. It's just.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I just don't want to make a difficult situation any more difficult before we have a chance to sort of get our arms around it. So it doesn't reflect that I think that we're out of control or anything like that. I just think we've got, over the years, have gotten in the habit of, down at the program level, people saying, I need X, and they go buy X, and then X shows up on the dock, and then I get a call saying there's this equipment that you now have to care and feed for. And it's like, that's not a great way to run an enterprise shared services model where the stuff just shows up. And
Two quick follow-ups. Was there pushback within the agency, and how long do you think this pause is going to last?
There was sort of, hey, Richard, be careful what you ask for, you just might get it, kind of warnings to me. You have no idea, what this, what's going to hit your office if you really, because FITARA says that I approve IT purchases. Well, and then everybody's saying, oh man, you don't have no idea how much that's going to be, and it's like, okay, I think that's why they call it work. No, I'm not afraid to see it all. In fact, I think I'd rather see it all than be surprised by it. So, what I've told the modal CIOs is, if you want to get out from under this, come to me with a comprehensive IT spend plan. Let's sit down, we'll go through it. If I can approve that spend plan, then you're free to execute against that plan. I want to make sure that they know what's going on in their cylinder of excellence, or silos we call them.
And any indication on how long you want to have that pause in place?
I started off saying 120 days. I got this Tiger team that's doing this baseline assessment. I was kind of trying to figure out how long it was going to take them to do it and kind of push this out beyond that. So I think the last time I saw it, we'd settled on 120 days.
And Paul Tibbetts with VA, you have an interesting perspective. The VA CIO shop is a little bit different than other agencies, thanks to a piece of legislation in 2006. Could you tell us the VA CIO story?
Sure. Let me just start off, though. I know we did some audience identification earlier with Congressman Hurd, but how many veterans are in the audience? Veterans, great. Let's all thank all the veterans for their service to the country. And next, I see a lot of friendly faces in the audience, but one long-standing friend I've worked with, Art Wu, is here, and I have to tell you a little Art Wu story, because I think he's likely to do it today with a cocktail napkin. But whenever I'd draw something, he'd drag me up to there to the hill, which I always actually enjoyed. I shouldn't say drag, but anyway. And I had a conversation with him and his counterparts. I'd start drawing something out there. He'd say, no, stop. He'd hand me his notebook, and he'd say, draw it in my notebook. So a year later, I'd go up to the hill and he'd say, remember this thing you drew in my notebook a year ago? Did you do this damn thing? So I think he's probably going to do it today too, right? You can make me draw this in your notebook? So he'll check out the truth or falsity of what I'm about to tell you, I'm sure, and probably get into that in Q&A. But yeah, we have, as far as I can tell, probably the most empowered CIO in federal government. Our CIO is in charge of all the IT people, all the IT contracts, all the IT systems. We have our own IT appropriation. And our challenge is actually using properly all the levers of control that Congress has given us. There's a major learning curve there, and I think, as you just said earlier, be careful what you ask for, you might get it. Well, we got it. So it's like a big lightning rod in the middle of the organization. And one thing it certainly has done for us, and I think for the Hill and the American public, is clarify accountability. That for sure, that happened kind of on day 2. I mean, and there's no doubt about who's accountable for IT at the VA. That said, however, there's no magic switch or silver bullet on knowledge, skills, and abilities in the organization. And our turnover, 8,000 people, if you look at 6 years to 45 years of employment duration inside of OINT, 6 years to 45 years, the area under that curve is about 85%. And so, I mean, culture change in our organization does not, did not, cannot happen overnight. Knowledge, skills, and abilities are at the bottom of improving IT operations and service to citizens. And that's largely the story for us. I mean, we can go on with Q&A, and I can give you examples, if you will, about where those lessons learned are. But from our perspective, even with the most empowered CIO, our scorecard, for example, that was alluded to before, is really not better than anyone else's. And you might ask why with the most empowered CIO in federal government. And I think it's going to come down, at the end of the day, it's not an organizational issue, it's not an org chart issue, blah, blah, blah. You're going to wind up with a culture and a knowledge, skills, and abilities issue at the bottom. And to paraphrase Ronald Reagan, with a turnover of personnel that's slower than the Supreme Soviet, this culture change is a significant problem. And it amounts to, I guess I'll add, with respect to a culture change agent, however, on the positive side, I find that a lot of new thinking, energetic, young minds, knowing the new concepts of operation that are out there, is in this GSA or federal program called 18F. I think it's the Digital Services team. We have a group of them in our organization, and what we're trying to do with that group is move from having them fish, i.e. building the next new nifty thing, to teaching us how to fish. So we build the next new nifty thing with them watching over our shoulders. So we're trying to move them much more into a teaching and mentoring mode than an actual do and develop mode, so we get knowledge transference before they evaporate. So that's, I think, a bright spot for us that's going to be really helpful. Maybe with that I'll
Yeah, I think it's an interesting
quit.
conversation. You talk about VA had the IT authority centralized in one single CIO, and we heard Jerry Connolly this morning say that FITARA stopped short of that it did not mandate one single CIO at each agency, and it is not very prescriptive. It allows, it just wants to give the CIO a seat at the table and have those conversations with the other members of the C-suite. But Paul, your experience is that even with this pretty robust centralization, there's still problems. Should that put a damper on expectations for FITARA, that we don't even have that level of centralization and authority? And it's, basically the directive to agencies is, the CIO now has power, work this out amongst yourselves. Should we lower our expectations, Margie?
No, not in the least. I think the work this out among yourselves is actually something that can be advantageous, because of what it encourages is it encourages the conversation between the CFO, the CPO, the CHICO, and the CIO, and it also encourages what I would consider to be a uniform approach to how you manage the organization. And any one of those elements cannot survive without the other. So each person has to be in the conversation. Each person has to understand their equities in making this work. It is not just about the CIO. It is about the ability to effect change and bring the subject matter expertise of the CIO into the equation. We get asked by our CFO community, how can we enable our mission space, and at the same time, how can we spend our next dollar most efficiently and buy down risk for our agency? And when we get asked that question, we are the ones that develop the business cases based on our expertise to answer that question. And our CFO takes that forward and he puts it in the equation and he says, okay, how do I rack and stack, the next IT enablement package against Border Patrol agents, against bed space in ICE, against another cutter for the Coast Guard? Because those are the trade-offs that community is making on a daily basis. We now have the opportunity to bring the IT part of that equation into sharper focus, and I think that sharper focus is occurring. But it is a cultural change on the procurement side. We have always at DHS, since I started there in 2006, we have something called ITAR, which is the IT Acquisition Review. We made a partnership connection very early with our CPO that said, I can't get a handle on that spend plan, I can't understand what's being spent out in the universe, and I can't ensure that everything that's being spent is aligned to my strategy and my architecture unless I know what's being signed on the dotted line in terms of our contractual mechanisms. And we partnered with them at the very beginning. They do not sign off on a procurement or make an award unless the CIOs or either at the departmental level or at the component level with the delegation of the departmental CIO is on that dotted line. They do not make an award unless that happens.
And that was pre-FITARA.
That was pre-FITARA. But what FITARA has done is it has strengthened and codified that particular process that we have. And it's expanded it somewhat because at the point at which FITARA came into being, our threshold at the departmental level was at a certain level that was higher than was requested by FITARA, so we moved down the threshold. And so we see a little bit more now. But to Richard's point, unless you know what's you've got to get your arms around the outflow before you can ensure that you are handling it appropriately. And you stop it at the outflow and make sure that you've got the right decision-making authorities there. And then ultimately, you keep pushing the decision-making authority of the CIO earlier and earlier in the cycle so that by the time you get to the outflow, you won't have misalignment. You won't have problems with your acquisitions at that point.
Richard, we're right kind of in the middle of budget season. I know this can be a little touchy for agencies, but one of the main elements of the CIO authorities under FITARA is giving the CIO a greater role in budget formulation. Is anything different this year, or is it still a little too soon, or what are you seeing?
Well, I think what's different, and I think Margie spoke to this, is FITARA has brought my office and the CFO office much closer together. We are communicating constantly back and forth, and my CFO's office loved the whole idea of FITARA because they felt like in years past, as they would go through budget, their preparation and discussion, that there would be IT things that were being proposed, and they now welcome my involvement in the review of that, and we have a very, very, very tight, good working relationship, and same with the acquisition folks and the CHICO folks. It's brought our four communities very, very close, And I think that was, the folks who wrote this, probably that was one of their intended consequences, is to make sure that those four groups are having constant communication and exchange of information and ideas.
So we'll start talking. We've heard a lot about the scorecards today. I don't know, probably don't have it on, but there's a lot of red. And I think that since the hearing where the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee released the scorecards, there's been a lot of reflection on how to think about them. Jerry Connolly says, we don't want them to be a scarlet letter on anyone's back. And it's really a way to measure where agencies kind of were really pre-FITARA, where, kind of a baseline. I just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to contextualize, their scores. The scorecards tracked data center consolidation, savings netted from IT portfolio review, the extent to which agencies use incremental development to kind of break up these large-scale IT projects, and the extent to which CIOs accurately report risks on the IT dashboard. Just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to talk about their score and how they're viewing it and what their path forward is.
Well, I got 3 Fs and a C, so maybe I should start.
I was going to.
I didn't do too good. What I told my team is I said, we could argue these grades and we could argue and maybe get 3 Ds and a C, but what difference does it make? Are we 500 miles from where we need to be or 400 miles from where we need to be? I accept the scorecard in the spirit with which it was put together, which is it is sort of a marker for a starting point. And I think the one that maybe is the most illustrative of the dilemma for me is the data center consolidation one. We didn't, we had a very funny exchange at the FITARA hearing about that, where Dave Pounder said, that's actually a good F. Richard, he got a good, I'm like. But the story behind that was a number of years ago, GAO asked my office before I got there, my predecessor, how much do you think you can save in data center consolidation? And this is about the point where O&B had said, let's target 40%. So he tried to figure out how much they were currently spending and then said, we'll save 40%. So this target was put out there, and 3 years later, they came back and said, how much have you saved? And we reported a much smaller number, and it was like 11% of what had been forecast, and hence the lousy grade. One of the things that, this is back to this baseline idea that I'm trying to put together. I think the thing that frustrates me the most is this, as a CIO, is that I don't have good cost. I don't know my unit costs. I don't have good cost data. And so when we're asked to make projections or report savings, I feel like I don't have a good way to be honest and to give because I really want to be honest about it. It is what it is, and it's certainly reflective of the situation that I'm trying to correct. So I'm not trying to run away from the data. I just feel like I don't have a good way of. I'd like the way I answer the question in 1 year to be the same way I answer the question a year later, and 2 years later, and 3 years later, using the same methodology for calculating, so that 1, we're being honest, 2, that we begin to see longitudinal trending, and that's accurate and real. And if I don't get anything else done with FITARA, I want to get that done. I want to get to where the Department of Transportation really understands how it spends its money, and what's the bang for the buck that we get. I want to be able to walk into an administrator's office and say, you know, they see IT as a cost center. I want to come in and say, here's how we're spending our money today. Here's an alternative to how we could, and a different way of going about this, and here's what we could potentially save. And I want those potentially to be saved to be real. I don't want to be making numbers up to try to get my way. I want to be able to say, no, this is exactly what the data tells me. So, I answer your question?
Yeah.
All right.
And Paul, you know, you mentioned VA has a very empowered CIO and has for quite some time, and then you look at the scorecard and VA has a C. Now that's average, but maybe less than what you would think for a CIO shop that's been centralized. Could you talk about that? And I know you said that, you know, you think maybe FITARA isn't enough for some of the other agencies. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, and even full empowerment of the CIO, I'd say, is not enough. There are other things, which was part of the pitch I was making earlier. But yeah, sure. So, for example, on data center consolidation, I guess, we have no issue any longer with, you know, I need to own my own servers by the customer, because we own all the servers. I mean, so we're past all that. We had civil war in 2006, 2007. We had one Undersecretary of Health leave at the time because the IT consolidation was going too fast. We had the would-be CIO leave because this consolidation was going too slow. I mean, it was absolute civil war. Well, we're past all that now. We've had, as you heard this morning, a bipartisan agreement that the consolidation at the VA is here to stay. So that part's over. But nonetheless, when you get down to the knowledge, skills, and abilities, the mechanics of figuring out what does it really take, what are the wise choices to make from a savings perspective, to be data-driven about, well, does it really make sense to move this data center or not, or how fast, or where to, and you get into all the other policy issues about connecting with it and so forth. Do we use DISA? Do we don't use DISA? You know, on and on and on, and then you dump cloud on top of that. It winds up that it's a very complicated set of circumstances to try to ferret through. You know, be careful what you ask for because you might get it. Empowering the CIO to say you have all the authorities still leaves you with this enormous cultural problem underneath to fix, a knowledge, skills, and abilities problem. Also, from a technical debt and legacy perspective, you know, we've made some spotty progress here and there, but today I couldn't tell you today, we can't tell you today that we've identified all of our critical points of failure and that we have a coup d'etat strategy in place and tested for all those critical points of failure. We don't know that. And the reason we don't know that is we're still operating a lot of the legacy stuff we inherited in 2006 with all the technical debt there. I mean, so that doesn't evaporate overnight just because of FITARA or empowering the CIO. It takes capital investment. Unfortunately, up to now, it's taken capital investment. Now we're moving into a world where, fortunately, we may be able to skip CapEx and move right to OpEx. So great. I mean, if we can do that. So there's some more light at the end of the tunnel with cloud, and we're very interested in moving in that direction as fast as we possibly can. So rather than remediating technical debt, we'll just skip it and move to something else and make it somebody else's problem. But on the savings side, let me just address that for a minute. It's never been part of VA culture to estimate savings. And if you go on top of that, it's never been part of VA culture to measure improved service to citizens. So those skill sets, those are muscles we've never exercised, right? And despite Klinger-Cohen, despite the Government Performance and Results Act. So, and then we get these shifting OMB definitions every now and then that come at us in this, I think it's called portfolio stat or something, where we send in an estimate. Well, it's got a big confidence interval around it. Well, then we do more analysis and the estimate is different. Well, then we get this flood of questions that comes back and say, why did you change your estimate? Well, it's because we got smarter since the last estimate, or because OMB changed your definition. So, I mean, there's a lot more to this. The last thing I'd say about FITARA, and to me, just because I'm tuned into it and conspicuous by its absence in the discussion this morning so far with the two keynote speakers who were very good, by the way, I learned a lot from them. And we're only beginning to see a turnaround this with the White House and Congress now, and that is people asking, well, what's the IT impact on improvement of service? What's the measurable impact that IT is going to make on improving service to citizens? For the 10 years I've been at VA, we have almost never gotten that question from anybody. Not from Congress, not from the White House, not from OMB. we had a $2 billion program where we had the opportunity to fix veteran access. I had to put the program together, the estimate. I briefed internal to the department, I briefed OMB, which is where it finally stopped because we wound up with the Choice Act being passed instead. But in all those briefings on this $2 billion program, the one question I was never asked by anybody, anywhere, the executive branch, OMB, anywhere, it didn't ever get to Congress, this particular one was, if you get the $2 billion, how much better is veteran access going to become? No one ever asked. Now, the truth is we could never have answered the question because we didn't have the skills to do it. But no one asked. So the absence of the skills wasn't evident to anybody.
And Margie, DHS, overall grade of C. What are you learning from that? What are you taking from that?
When we looked across the spectrum of the individual parts of that score, I think the takeaway for us was there was one area where it was clear that we needed to focus, and that was on the move to DevOps and Agile. We've done it successfully in a couple of huge programs within DHS, including CIS transformation, which is all about the immigration process and providing benefits. And there are a lot of forms and transactions that are associated with that. And we're doing a sea change and doing DevOps and actually changing that program. But a lot of our programs, and I think this is true of a number of agencies, have embedded legacy IT that seems to have a life of its own. And it is COBOL, it is mainframe, it is things you haven't heard of in a long time, but they've been effective because what we're talking about are high transaction volume approaches. So when we're talking about screening millions of people coming across an individual border port in a given day, those are kind of workhorses. But it's very imperative, and I think that Tony Scott has been talking about this a lot recently, and it's one of his primary priorities, that we start to determine how we're going to peel those apart and actually execute those programs within new technology paradigms. So most of our focus is on two things. First of all, making sure that we take a look across our programs and everything that's getting a new start is actually built in open source, is modular, and actually adopts DevOps as its primary approach, unless it's obviously inappropriate, which I think there are very few opportunities where it would be inappropriate. Then secondarily, we have to reconstitute our governance process and to actually enable that, because a lot of the waterfall approaches and the documentation and the governance that's existed that actually did work in the past doesn't necessarily fit for what we're trying to do for the future. So we're doing that right now and we're changing it. So that particular score, which my worst score was in that area, is focusing us on making that change and affecting that change. And again, it requires more than just we decide we're going to move out and use different technologies. It requires changing the acquisition structure, the governance structure, and the actual approach of funding that surrounds that in order to make it successful. So we have to hit all of those aspects in order to make it work.
And lest I be accused of only trumpeting the bad news, there were some, in each of the elements, there were some positive scores for agencies. So DHS received an A in data center consolidation, and transportation got a B in IT portfolio review savings, and VA, which has also been recognized by GAO for many years for using agile development for some of the major IT programs. So there were pockets of good scores, wasn't all bad news. But broadly, looking at the scorecard, do you think it was measuring the right things? And what would you add, or what are some other scores maybe for a future iteration of the scorecard that you think should be included?
Well, I know at my budget hearing I suggested that a maybe, and I got a bunch of thumbs up from the congressman around data center consolidation. I think I'd like to be able to show them how we're moving to the cloud and have that be a measure. And I think that, because I'm sort of past the idea of, the brick and mortar consolidation, and I'm more into how can I lift this stuff up and move it to the cloud. To me, that's where, that's what we're more focused on that than we are just the physical consolidation of our assets. I'm trying to get us out of the business of care and feeding some of this stuff, and so that was one suggestion I had, and they told me I was preaching to the choir. So I'm glad they agree.
I mean, it's many of my friends accuse me of singing a one-note song, but I would say the number one big glaring deficiency is there's nothing. The savings comes closest, but there's nothing in that whole construct that says how much of your IT spend is covered by a metrics program that measures improvement of service to citizens. I put that in there, number one, because then it'll help you filter through all the techno-babble, and for all we know, moving a data center from one place to another, a veteran would never know the difference. And maybe the spend wouldn't change much. I mean, who knows, right?
Might not even be the right thing.
It might not be the right thing, or at least for the next dollar.
Right.
So for example, I had a very senior leader in VA just yesterday say, well, we're going to have this wonderful culture change in the VA because we're about to put a mobile app out there on all your smartphones, which is going to allow a veteran to use right from your smartphone to request an appointment. Well, and he says, that's going to be transformative and a major culture change. And unfortunately, he wasn't in the mood to listen to me, which thankfully you all seem to be. But anyway, he wasn't. And so I didn't say anything, but I'm thinking to myself, oh really? All that's, and if we don't have all the clerks and all the empty appointment slots, what that's going to allow is a veteran to find out faster he can't get an appointment. So I mean, and I'd ask all of you, all the IT people in the room here smarter than me, if you think about iPhone, you think about Android, those aren't smartphones, those are ecosystems. Somebody had a vision of end-to-end, and you think of your iPhone as something in your hand. It's not. It's a viewport into a whole ecosystem. And if we don't think those things through from end to end with you industry out there to help us do it, we're going to wind up with 55 more apps in an app store, and the veterans, clicking on something, but quite frankly, the health's going to be the same, and no different. I mean, telemedicine. If we do telemedicine, it's the answer to every problem on the face of the earth, right? Well, it could be, however, that we're just going to facilitate access to bad care. Well, then where does that get us? I mean, if you look at American medicine, right? American medicine is certainly no stellar example that we can follow of effective expenditure of healthcare dollars, right? So what's telemedicine going to do? Everybody faster access to badly organized healthcare? I mean, come on. I mean,
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it is just imperative that we center on the mission delivery metrics and how IT enables those. Because what we talk about in our office is we don't deliver IT. We don't exist for that. We deliver Homeland Security. We are an enabler of that mission space. And so everything that I do has to have an outcome that is positive to the programs. That's why I keep talking about the programs. That's just the way we're constructed, because most of our IT delivery occurs within the programs. But when you talk about things like immigration reform, when you talk about things like screening for passengers getting on airplanes, when you talk about things like meeting people on the worst day after they've experienced a natural disaster and they need benefits, when you talk about those kinds of things, you can rally around that flag pretty quickly. That's a very strong metric. And there isn't anybody, any discipline or any line of business within DHS, whether they're an operator or whether they're part of the CXO community, which actually enables that mission delivery, that would not say that they are there for the mission. I think that's true in most agencies. So if you use that as your starting point, then your metric should be driven by how you respond to that. And that should not just be for the CIO, it should be for the CFO and the CPO and others. So we're an enabling organization within our Undersecretary for Management office. And I don't get up every day to, I'm sorry, but I hate to say this because somebody's going to shoot me for it, but I don't get up every day to deliver the BlackBerry or the iPhone. I get up every day to deliver the mission. Delivering the BlackBerry and the iPhone is part, because it is communication, it is command and control, I understand that. It does have to work. But that's not where I focus. I focus my key change arenas on the kinds of things that I was just talking about, like how do I move my programs into agile development and get better technologies to enable the mission.
We're just about ready to open up for Q&A. Real quick, we'll do a lightning round. Where do you want to be in a year from now? Hopefully we'll be a little further along in the implementation. And how are you going to be measuring success? And another metric, GAO says the average tenure of a CIO is about 2 years. I think everybody up here has far exceeded that. But there's a lot, and we're coming up at the end of administration, a lot of turnover. How do you maintain progress that you're going to be making?
What we're doing with our plan is we are embedding the FITARA tenets into our actual management directives. So it's codified in policy within DHS, and that it actually gets executed within the construct of our naturally occurring governance process. And therefore, who sits in this chair is not the key. It's the fact that the principle and the policy and the execution of that policy exists, and it exists long after any of us have left this stage.
Yeah, a year from now, as I've said, I want an as-is blueprint, and I want to understand my costs. What I've done is I've put together a stellar executive team. My deputy CIO, my CTO, many of you know Maria wrote. Not as many of you probably know my deputy, Kristen Baldwin. The associate CIO who's doing my shared service, Jack Albright. Great team of folks who I know that if I just evaporated, they'd keep trying to do the same things that I've been drum beating for since I got there. That they see this as their priority as well. So.
Oh, well, for the VA, I'm going to continue to push this message at VA, and that is where I think we should be as key performance indicators in terms of measurable improvement of service to citizens for all of our major portfolios.
Okay, time for Q&A, sir.
Excellent sessions, all. John Weiler, IT Acquisition Advisory Council. I'd like to bring up Marjorie's key point about transforming the acquisition process. And one thing that we have monitored for the past few years is that the government strapped with an industrial age acquisition model that was built primarily by DoD, by weapon systems, and it is spread across government agencies. Why is FITARA not really pushing to transform the acquisition process more? Not much has been said about that, but that seems to be the Einstein quote is continuing the same process and expect different results.
Well, in our hands at least, I've been doing, as many of you know, I have been doing acquisitions, trained at DAU and all that for many years, but I can't for the life of me I can't find people to tell me specifically it's this part, it's this paragraph, it's this part of the FAR that's problematic. I've worked with so many contracting officers, some who understand the FAR very well, some who seem not to tell you that with the comment made earlier today, I think Congressman Hurd, to me it looks much more like a problem of which contracting officer you work with and how they interpret it than the FAR. I mean, I've had many contracting officers do everything we needed to do because they knew what citations in the FAR were applicable to my situation. So you could say, well, then what that means is the FAR is too open to interpretation. Well, that might be true. That might be a legitimate thing to say, but I can't find people who tell me specifically what needs to be changed, and I don't know what specifically needs to be changed. I don't. The FAR is not an impediment to me getting the job done.
I'm not saying the law. I'm saying the practice, the process.
Well, sure. I mean, gee, that's I'm sure we're going to have a lot to learn on cloud and cloud brokerage services and how to be all that. That we haven't done any cloud brokerage service yet. So, as far as a future challenge and KSAs amongst us and the contracting community, I'd say cloud brokerage is going to be an opportunity to learn. But beyond that, I can't tell you this. To me, whatever you announce to industry up front, pretty much the FAR says. Well, if you tell the rules to industry up front, you can pretty much do what you want and it'll be FAR compliant. If you try to change the ground rules in midstream of an acquisition, you're dead meat.
think we're running out of time. Time for one more quick question from.
Good morning, and thank you for today. This has been very enlightening, and you guys have a lot to do before the holidays and closing out your books. But some of the things that I heard, especially the congressman in the front end, were talking about really kind of gaps in our approach, some things that are broken somewhere along the line. And it sounds like, Dr. Tibbetts, from what you've really talked about is human capital. Without the right human capital, everything that's talked about at your levels and above are not going to get accomplished, because those are the people that have to make it happen. So whether it's procurement, it's obvious that they're not up to speed on the new technologies. How do they make the right acquisition evaluations to help you get what needs to be done? And is that going to be something that perhaps, as you say, it's a performance metric perhaps in procurement to even allow this thing to drive forward this next year?
And we should say real quickly, in FITARA there is a mandate that the CIO and the Chief Human Capital Officer come up with kind of core competencies for the entire IT staff. So
Yeah, we have that, and we have a competency model, and we're working through it right now. And if you work, again, it's the no magic bullet answer I'm going to give you, right? So we're doing exactly that, and we're on our second iteration, I guess, of a competency model. What we found out is it's really not hard to develop all those competencies as to what any federal employee should have or be, or any leader should have or be. That's not hard. I mean, management, leadership, there's a ton of literature. By the time you get to the technical competencies, all of a sudden there's a big problem, even developing a competency model. And particularly, let me tell you, architecture, strategy, and design. The first two iterations, we're on the second one right now. There's nothing in our competency model right now with respect to the technical skills for enterprise architecture. As an example. The closest they come are process engineers, which is not yet. So I think that, again, yeah, it's a great idea, but when you get right down, and by the way, after you get the competency model in place, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to hire those people in the marketplace, right? You still got to attract those people. And it's mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And yeah, we can try to provide mastery, autonomy, and purpose for people to be happy with their jobs, but there's got to be another piece to it, which is, the way we're looking at it is, shore up the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the staff, recruit, retain, blah, 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 as much as you can, but at the same time, offload complexity, which is why we're so interested in moving to the cloud as much and as fast as we can. Shore up the skills, offload complexity, to try to reduce that gap.
I think we too have to be conscious of emerging fields. So there are a couple that have come up recently, of course, in the cybersecurity arena, and then also in DevOps, and defining those and being able to attract talent or develop talent internally within those two areas are primary concern for us. All of the disciplines within IT are critically important, but I think there's less known about those two because they're evolving. Data scientist, I would add to that equation too.
Yeah.
So if you look at
No,
those
I wouldn't do
three
that.
arenas, we're trying to define, and we've actually got a program that's under our Chico and DHS that is identifying the cyber skills, and they're not just cyber skills in the IT arena, but they're in the policy arena and in the legal arena and a number of other arenas where you would have to actually have that kind of talent in your equation to execute the kind of programs that we're expected to execute today. It's evolving.
all right, we are out of time. Thanks so much to our speakers for being with us today.
Thank you.